You're live, Chairman.
Well, good morning and welcome to the 7th session of the scrutiny of the integrated plan for the council. It's a huge wad of paper that is here and it's broken up into different sections, and this morning's section is looking at the area covering adult care, health and well-being. My name is Sandy Walkington. I'm the Vice Chair of Scrutiny for Hertfordshire County Council, and I am also the councillor representing the St Albans South Division. Before I ask my colleagues to introduce themselves, I've got a bit of boilerplate text which I am required to read, and that is, due to the coronavirus pandemic, the council will be holding this meeting electronically. Normally, of course, it would be in person. Members of the public, I love this one, may also attend this meeting in an electronic capacity, and there is a link on the council's website for them to do so. Unless they found that link already, then they will not be privy to that information I've just read. Members of this meeting are asked to keep their microphones switched off until called to speak, and to switch their microphones off once they have finished speaking. Cameras may be left on throughout the meeting if members wish. Sometimes if there are bandwidth problems, it helps if you turn it off. But cameras should be switched on in any event, even when speaking in the meeting. And can I remind members that to indicate a wish to speak, please use the raise hand function. Now, I will now go round the team and ask you to introduce yourself in order of Christian names, seems to be the fairest. So first of all, Calvin.
Calvin Horner, I'm the member for Bishop Stortford East.
Dee.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Dee Hart and I am the member for the Waltham Cross Division, Borough of Broxbourne. Thank you, Chair.
Fiona.
I'm Fiona Guest. I'm the member for Hemel Hempstead North West.
John.
John Graham, I'm the Conservative member for Potters Bar East.
Oh, I've just lost my screen. There we are. And going down, then we're into Nigel.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nigel Bell. I'm the member for West Watford.
And then we're into Peter.
Yes, good morning. My name is Peter Hebden and I'm here to represent the good people of Hatfield East.
Richard.
Good morning, Richard Thake, the Nebelton Connecticut Division.
Ron.
Hi, Ron Tyndall, Hemel Hempstead, St Paul's.
And Steve.
Good morning, everyone. Steve Wortley, member for Cheshunt Central Division here in the Borough of Broxbourne.
Thank you. I think that's all of the interview team. I'll now invite Stella Nash, who is the executive member in charge of this area, to introduce herself and any officers and indeed fellow members that you have brought along to support you, Stella.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's good to be here, and first of all I want to thank each and every one of you for your time spent with us today. It's really appreciated. Introducing myself, I'm Stella Nash. I'm the executive member for Adult Care, Health and Wellbeing, and I'm going to ask my team that are with today to introduce themselves by one to you, starting with Helen Manouf.
Morning, everybody. I'm Helen Manouf. I'm Operations Director for Older People's Services. And the panel may know that Chris Badger is sending his apologies today, owing to him being on paternity leave, which is lovely. And hopefully we can handle anything that Chris will be called upon to deal with. Thank you, Chair.
Is there anybody else that you wish to introduce, Stella?
Jackie Albury.
Chairman, can I please ask through you? I'm
Stella's talks
very difficult.
Microphone, yes.
I'm very difficult to hear, Stella.
Yes.
Very, very quiet. So
Really?
hopefully she can.
If you could move your microphone a bit nearer, Stella. I was about to ask that, but Richard.
Okay,
beat me to it.
Yesterday, something's happened with this mic. With it just when you need it the most. Is that improving?
Slightly. I think just keep quite close to it and speak up loud and clear. But carry on introducing. I think you were about to introduce. You were about to introduce Jackie, I believe.
Jackie, I'd like to introduce Jackie Albury.
Good morning, and good morning, Chair. Yes, I'm Jackie Albury. I'm the Director of Planning and Resources in Adult Care Services.
And we'd also like to introduce Paul Stephen.
Hello, I'm Paul Stevenson, actually. I'm the in Finance Manager of Adult Care Services.
And Mark Harvey.
Good morning. I am Mark Harvey, Operations Director for Adult Disability Services and Mental Health.
And I think we're all here.
Excellent. Now you're still being very, very quiet, Stella. So you're going to.
I'm speaking really loud. So
okay.
Can you hear me now?
I can. That's
I'm
excellent.
almost at shout level now.
Yes. I'm really sorry, but it's equally for the people listening
Absolutely.
at home.
Absolutely.
So
I don't know what's happening.
Okay, that's much better. Now, yes. I'm going to invite you to summarize what the portfolio is about in not more than 5 minutes, if you can do that. That's also helpful for people watching, and it just reminds all of us. As part of that, it would be useful to actually clarify the key priorities, because in your portfolio on 2 pages at the opening section of the IP pack, you've got a list of key priorities and programs, but then the first question in the main text is what are the key priorities for the portfolio over the period 2022 to 23 to 25, 26? And the answers are somewhat different. I mean, it's probably the same, but nevertheless, they don't align with what was written literally 2 pages before. So if you can just summarize what you're about and what your key objectives are, that would be very helpful in order to contextualize the rest of the questioning. Thank you.
Of course. Right. I'm hoping that you can hear me, panel and chair. I will speak as loud as I comfortably can. Thank you. Thank you, Nigel, for that. We are adult care, health and wellbeing. That incorporates adult care, residential homes, daycare services, support services, domestic abuse, mental health attached to our services, day-to-day services, assisted living, home services, after discharge, taking care, support services through social workers, etc. So it's a large umbrella that covers us. So every residence in the county that at some stage may need care will come under our umbrella. Thank you.
That is very, very short. I think it is worth adding that you are far and away the biggest chunk of council tax expenditure. It's well over £1 million a day, and just in the course of the 2.5 hours of this meeting this morning, you'll have spent well over £100,000. So it is quite scary numbers.
It's not scary. It's appropriate. It's numbers that are needed. It's the money that is required to run the service efficiently, and that is how our budget lies with us.
And can I just add further? We're not in the business today of catching you out. This whole process is just about making sure that there is transparency and clarity, and just to make sure that the executive member and officers, are actually thinking about what's happening. I'm sure you are, but also that becomes clear to the rest of us. So this is not a catching out exercise. It's a way of just shining a torch on the activities of all the different aspects of the council. So
thank you, Sandy. I appreciate what you just said.
We will go into the first key line of inquiry, which is about the impact of COVID-19 and Dee wants to kick off on that one. So Dee, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. My question is, COVID-19 has had a huge financial impact on the Council's costs for 2021, 22 and 23. Combined are forecast to exceed £250 million. COVID-19 continues to be a pressing issue for adult care and wellbeing. However, efficiency targets seem to be largely unaffected, with the IP stating that full levels of savings for projects are still going to be achieved. Could you update us on the COVID legacy impact, please?
Thank you. Thank you, Dee. Thank you for that. In terms of delivering savings, adult care services, we have a good track record in the past. For example, demand management in older people has delivered 13.7 million of savings over the last few years. Most savings in the integrated plan are existing savings. And for adults with disabilities and the Hearts Partnership Foundation Trust, we have provided significant investment to support the delivery of savings in this area. However, I'm going to hand you over to Jackie Albury, who will give you the absolute details of this in response to your question. Thank you, Dee.
Thanks, Stella, and thanks, Dee, for your question. In terms of as Stella said, the existing savings, which are detailed on page 67 of the integrated plan, those existing savings listed in developing the integrated plan, we've reviewed all of those savings and reprofiled them to respond to the impact of COVID. The paper says that we expect to achieve the level of savings, particularly in two areas, which are the first being in in-house provider services, where we expect to deliver the savings in full, and for as Stella's already mentioned, those for the Hertfordshire Foundation Trust, where the full amount of savings that were originally anticipated when the saving was put into the IP a few years ago are expected now to be achieved by 24-25. So if I take the first of those, the in-house day services saving, that saving has been reduced already in terms of reprofile to respond to the impact of COVID. So it was reduced in the current year from £1 million down to 400 in the current year. We've reprofiled it to respond to the impact that we had last year on COVID, and we are actually making some of that saving in the current year. So we do expect to be on track for that one, as noted in the papers. In terms of the Hertfordshire Partnership Foundation Trust, the paper says that the savings will be we still achieved by 24-25. So that was the full amount that we were expecting to achieve when we originally worked through the savings with HPFT. We have reprofiled those savings and reduced them in the earlier years to respond to the impact that HPFT are experiencing in delivering those savings with COVID. But the original savings were based on a plan and a target that HPFT have signed up to. HPFT have committed to deliver them in that profile, but we're supporting them with significant investment. So we've put in £3.8 million of capital funding to help fund the developing the intensive enablement service, and £1.7 million of revenue IT invested to transform money to support the rollout of connected lives approach within HPFT. The savings are supported by extensive modelling, and we are working with HPFT. As I said, they've committed to deliver those. So those are the two savings where we've said that we will achieve them as they are set out in the IP, as we hope to. But I think, as you've noted, COVID has made the whole of producing the integrated plan extremely uncertain, and we are keeping that, we are keeping everything under review as we go forward.
Dee, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I do. The ring fencing of £64.2 million of resources to create a COVID-19 emergency funding pot to help fund additional costs and loss of income in future years. Can you just update us on that, please?
Sorry,
about the loss of income in future years.
Okay, can I bring Stephen Pilsworth? He's got his hand up to answer that question, because I think he might know the answer for you, Dee.
Stephen?
Yeah, first fail of the morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm Stephen Pilsworth, Director of Finance. I hope you don't mind. I was quite keen to join and listen to the discussion this morning, but actually I've got hopefully a little bit of background that might help with that. Obviously, as you heard, and I think Councillor Hart, you mentioned it about the amount that the council has needed to spend to maintain services during COVID. I think we've had an absolutely fantastic response across all areas, but including in adult care. The department came up with I think a really brilliant plan of how we'd support care providers, anything they needed by way of extra staffing, PPE or anything like that. We have met the cost of that ever since the pandemic started. Obviously, that does come with a cost attached to it. A lot of that has been covered by support from government grants, but we did, as a council at the start of this year, effectively set aside as much money as we possibly could to cope with the pandemic this year. That has met all the costs we've needed in the current year. And indeed, council-wide, we have some of that left over that we're using to roll into next year to help support the budget and overall costs. And the £64 million you mentioned was that pot we put together at the start of the year. So not only has that been incredibly helpful this year, whenever departments have come to me and said we've got a COVID related issue, we've had funding to be able to respond to that, because the position has been changing throughout the year. And indeed, only yesterday, quite late on, Jackie, Helen and I were talking about some of the waiting list issues and how we might use some of that pot to help tackle that issue. But as I say, it helps with that. And we've got some left over to support the budget next year. So, yeah, I hope you don't mind me jumping in, and hopefully that helps answer that question.
That's a very useful clarification. Thank you, Stephen. Dee, are you happy with that?
I'm very happy, Chairman. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Right. Anybody else with questions on this? I have one question, and that is that, I mean, the words demand management, kind of weasel words, I always think. What does demand management mean? Is it actually making it lots of hoops for people to jump through so that they give up? I mean, what do you mean by demand management?
Helen.
You're passing it to Helen, right, Helen?
I suppose I was going to say it is a bit of jargon, and it's probably not when you step back and think about it, it's probably not the most helpful phrase. But I suppose what it really is us fulfilling our Care Act responsibility of delaying, deferring, hopefully preventing even the build-up of needs, the long-term reliance and dependence on the council for ongoing care and support, because people at the end of the day don't really want that. Really, they want to carry on and be as independent as they possibly can for as long as they can. I think that's what we'd all want for ourselves. And so it's about, good information, good advice. It might be about a short-term piece of support to help you get back on your feet coming out of hospital. It might be about input to help you get a job or develop skills for maintaining your apartment or your accommodation on the long-term basis. So it's all about that kind of prevention, delay, support to help people live as independently as possible. And I guess as officers, we sometimes call that demand management, but really that's probably not a very helpful phrase.
No, that's a happier way of describing it. It's a slightly unfortunate two words, I think, perhaps, but there we are. Got you. Ron, you got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Stephen mentioned potential use of the pot is the reduction of waiting lists. Could we have the potential waiting lists identified, please?
Chairman, if you don't mind, I can pick that one up. So we have over the course of the pandemic, we've seen an increase in the number of people waiting to be assessed, and we We went through this at Adult Care Health and Wellbeing Panel in December when we presented the winter plan for adult care services. I haven't got the numbers immediately in my head, but we know that perhaps they're up to perhaps about 1,800 people waiting for assessment. There's always a level of assessment wait that's in the system inherently. And the challenge that we've set the teams is to say, well, how do we get back to the level of wait that we ordinarily would see in the system? What does that look like? And as Stephen was saying, and Mark looks like he wants to come in, we were talking last night about the capacity that we need to do that work. We are able to, thankfully, through that COVID fund, bring in some resources to help us work through those lists and make sure that everyone gets the assessment they need. I'll hand that to Mark. Mark.
If you can be brief, Mark, but yes, please.
Indeed, and it was just really to offer a level of assurance that when we refer to waiting lists in the service, it doesn't necessarily mean there's 1,800 people that have never seen a social worker, for example. So it could be people well known to us who need a review because of our responsibilities, but aren't necessarily needing additional care or changes. So it is about us managing those numbers, but it doesn't mean that all 1,800 of those people are waiting and have not seen someone from our services. So just really to add that assurance to councillors.
I mean, I think this is very interesting. We're going to move on, but I think actually, I'm sure we will be pondering about whether we should be seeking more information and indeed updates about the situation with waiting lists. It's a very, very current issue nationally, of course, as well, both NHS and doubtless other care providers. But let us now move on to our second key line of inquiry, which is one that has been a drumbeat throughout all the evidence gathering sessions in this year's IP scrutiny process, and that's the difficulties surrounding recruitment and manpower. And Fiona has some questions, is going to lead off on this.
I do indeed, Chairman, thank you. Recruitment and staffing are currently significant issues for the service. Workforce and retention grants will help to offer financial incentives over the short term, but what is being done to address the medium to longer term recruitment issues?
Thank you, Fiona. What a pertinent question. Absolutely. Workforce challenges exist both in our external workforce and internal workforce, and this is ongoing. And as everyone that's here this morning knows, that this isn't just relevant to Hertfordshire. It's a national issue. On the IP has our integrated plan has significant investment in external workforce of £18 million, and you can ask, well, what does that mean? What it means that we're able to offer support payments to our carers through our providers who provide our services, of taking it up to £10.30 per hour, which is above the national living wage and the minimum wage as well. This funding is the latest in a series of policy decisions we've made to give people working in care recognition for what they're doing, appreciation for everything that they have done for us over the years, and especially during the COVID transition period. I'm going to ask Mark to expand on this further in a lot of detail. It's a very, very important question that's been asked. Thank you, Fiona, again.
But Mark, please don't go into such detail to use up all the time. So can you be pithy as well?
I will do, noted, yes, thank you. I suppose just to add to Councillor Nash's point there, the investment that we put in this year around workers' pay will, we hope, have a significant impact. But I think it's just to add that that investment is addition to a previous investment we've made since 2020. So overall, just over £28 million has been invested into care worker pay across Hertfordshire as a way of us trying to increase, retain and protect one of the most important workforces we have in the county. I think one of the things we are very clear as well is that pay is not all of the agenda for people. We have a very diverse workforce coming from different backgrounds, and we're very keen to enable lifelong learning, development of people's education, qualifications, so that actually there's an additional benefit of working in social care. Gives us a much better workforce, but gives people better outcomes in terms of their own employment and enjoyment. And to that end, we've done a number of things. So we have the Hertfordshire Care Standard, which we launched in 2014. That allows access to multiple areas of training via through HCPA, the Hearts Care Provider Association, but the County Council as well. We have a very in-depth offer of learning and development for the workforce of social care, particularly those not necessarily employed by the council, but across all providers, private, voluntary sector that are a member of the HCPA, and our requirements around the care standard. We've got a number of initiatives. So we have a care academy that's been developed. The council itself has a care cadet scheme where we work particularly with young adults, maybe known through the care services themselves, who are adding opportunities to become care workers and qualifications through our cadet scheme. So there's a number of additional offers around the pay, which we've already, as I say, we significantly invested in. In addition, one of the big challenges as well is our professional workforce, our occupational therapists, our nurses, our social workers. And again, we've taken a similar approach. So I personally would say our professional development offer is second to none in the country. We know that when social workers come and join us, they tend to stay. We have a very long service record in Hertfordshire. On the annual health checks for social workers, which the government runs, last year we came out second in most of the categories in the country. So we do need to address some of the pay, and the future workforce work that the council is currently doing will hopefully pick up on some of those issues. But our offer to professionals is significant, and there is good evidence that once with us they stay. We're investing heavily in the new apprenticeship programs so that when people are with us, care workers can then come and join us. We will help them become qualified professionals and retain them as Hertfordshire workforce, most of which are Hertfordshire residents as well. So there's a real public service commitment in our service. Thank you very much, Mark.
Fiona, do you have a supplementary?
I do indeed. During my first term on HCC in the early 2000s, the phrase was repeated many a time, we grow our own. And the Care Cadet scheme would seem to be an aspect of growing our own. But what are we doing to promote care as a career to young people?
So I think there's a number of key areas that we've done that in. So we work very closely with the NHS, who runs a recruitment campaign that runs through all of the schools in Hertfordshire. In normal times, we have 2 or 3 conferences a year where we invite schools along, and myself and colleagues sit on work stalls promoting social care as an opportunity for young adults. The Care Cadet scheme, as you mentioned, Councillor Guest, was specifically aimed at younger adults and has been very successful at getting people in through that programme. I would say as well, what we also do is work with older adults that have maybe taken career breaks and want to come back into employment, and that helps us offer a wider range of opportunities. And those apprentice programs have been quite significant for us over the last 2 or 3 years to be able to do that. I mean, just to say, I think it works because the County Council trained me as a social worker back in 1993, and I'm still here. So I think it is definitely evidence of something we want to do. And actually, a number of colleagues that I trained with are now still working with us in the council.
Well, there we are. So you're walking the talk.
Chairman, before I finally shut up, and you mentioned the careers fairs that we go to 2 or 3 times a year in normal times. In COVID times, what have we been doing to promote care as a career?
So that has been very difficult. If nothing else, the schools themselves are not have not been fully in attendance, so we haven't been able to do central fairs. We've done a number of social media campaigns. One of the options we've got a very good lobby to government around workforce, and we're able to be part of supporting them in developing a workforce grant that last year we used for a very big recruitment campaign. I would say the campaign was very much targeted at all residents, but had a younger adult aspect and appeal to it. it. It reminded people that social care isn't just about getting people up and keeping them clean. It's much more important than that. So that campaign, which is still live now, was very targeted over social media, lots of portals where younger adults would look, and then we hope to pick up some of the recruitment around that. As we go back in a kind of post-COVID endemic world, we will be picking up again the joint workforce approaches with the NHS, but certainly the careers fairs and our opportunities to link in with people across schools.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I've got John and Ron. We're slightly running over, but John, fire away, crisp and brief, please.
Yeah, Chairman, it's a specific point. The Audit Committee commissioned a deep dive into the strength of the healthcare providers, and reference is made in the plan on page 70 to this report. I haven't seen the report because the Audit Committee was cancelled in December. But one of the risks, clearly, the cost of recruitment and manpower does not only affect ourselves internally, but also presumably is affecting some of those external providers. So I wonder whether Stella mentioned an £18 million provision that's been made. To what extent is that provision available to support our external providers, or is this just, or what account has been taken of the same issue in our external providers? Thank you.
Shall I take an initial response, Councillor Nash? Is that okay?
Yes.
So there's probably two answers. The recruitment obviously is a costly impact on providers. So the recruitment campaign we have run on behalf of all providers in Hertfordshire. So we have a single portal. So anyone that wishes to come into social care can come through our recruitment campaign. We will administer that programme and then we will pass on those applicants to the wider workforce. So we've done that in partnership with HCPA. That removes a lot of that cost burden to them. They haven't had to fund the recruitment. We've done that through the grants that we've had centrally. It also allows us a much closer relationship with the workforce and the providers in terms of that approach. So we think that's been quite successful. That's partly off the back of the central government campaign where they had a single portal. We've taken that approach but made it much more personal to Hertfordshire as an option. In terms of the 18 million, I might defer to colleagues as well, but I think that predominantly is our investment in care wages for the provider sector. So that money is passed through to them to allow us to pay a level of wage that we have ambition and expectation to in Hertfordshire.
Right. John, are you happy with that as an answer?
Yes, so I'm hearing that the 18 million that just to confirm, thank you for the answer on the portal. I think that's a great solution, and I think that's innovative and is helping take cost out of the whole system. And what I'm hearing is the 18 million you're providing for wages across your provision. So some of that money will go to support the providers as well. I see Helen nodding, so I've got the right summary, have I? Thank you.
Yes, Councillor, that is all going out to the external workforce.
All going out.
Jackie, unless you're adding something, I'm conscious of time and Ron has a question, so I'm inclined to move on to Ron. And Ron, whatever you ask, keep it brief, please.
Yeah, very quickly. First of all, with respect to the Care Academy, do we work closely with the University of Hertfordshire? And secondly, with regard to the Care Cadets, do we actually have any involvement through the cadets with young carers, which although come under children and another part of the council, are very much in the care sector as such as what they do at home?
Yes, so in terms of the answer university, I'll keep it brief. It's one of my favourite subjects, but we have extensive relationships with the university. We have a formal teaching partnership, which we set up probably 3 years ago now, partly supported by central government money from DFE and Department of Health and Social Care. That teaching partnership is also inclusive of the Tavistock and Portman NHS Teaching Trust as well. So we have good access to programmes. We've offered doctorates to workforce colleagues. We have a number of programmes and postgraduate diplomas that we offer across the whole workforce, particularly in the area of social work, and significant research and publications that we're involved with in terms of those arrangements. In terms of the Care Cadets, yes, they do link into young carers In the brass, that the care cadets, we specifically target those young adults that are known to children's social care services. So not just those that may have experienced social care requirements themselves, but carers as well. And therefore we target that offer across the board to be able to enable those people to come into our workforce.
Ron,
thank you. Yep, thanks very much.
In that case, I think we will draw a line under this particular key line of inquiry. Could I just ask that we try and lay off the acronyms if possible? HCPA, Hertfordshire Care Providers Association, but not everybody will know that. Can we just remember there are people listening who may not be as familiar as we are with the 3-letter and 4-letter acronym disease which affects this area. So we're now going to move into our third line of inquiry. The County Council has declared a climate emergency. We have clear ambitions in terms of getting to zero carbon, and Peter has some questions on this front. Peter, over to you.
Thank you. Quite straightforward questions, really, with regards to sustainability. What is being done within the service to tackle climate change within the care homes, and also with vehicles? Carers are travelling from one address to another, and obviously I should imagine most have petrol cars. Are we able to do anything to reduce the carbon footprint for the staff in this way?
Thank you, Peter. I'll take that one. Start with that one. We have a commitment to reduce emissions and improve energy efficiency without a doubt in all our property refurbishments, all new plans going forward, and to build to high environmental standards in anything that we do, in line with being carbon free, etc. for 2030. In terms of vehicles, now our vehicles, some older than others, in terms of vehicles, we're working with the sustainability team on a fleet transformation programme. We can't just change them all overnight, but we're working to replace as new, and are piloting the use of an electric minibus within the day services. Now, Helen has done a lot of work on this, and I'm going to pass you over to Helen to continue with this about the use of electric minibuses that have been piloted and to give further information, and I will join in.
Thank you, Councillor. I think I want to assure the panel that we as officers recognise that we've got a significant challenge on our hands in sort of working within and across adult care services to address and play our role that we need to play in the sustainability challenge. I was at a seminar on Monday where Julie Greaves, the head of diversity, was talking us through the projections for each department. And it was clear to me, looking at those projections, that we've got some work to do, some significant work to do to make sure that we're going to be able to deliver that ambition for 2030. So the work that we've done so far to support that agenda, we've done a lot of thinking about our new developments. So members of the panel may be aware we've got, and that it's set out in the capital programme, a number of investment programmes. So developing nursing care for highly frail adults, an accommodation strategy for adults with disabilities, development of extra care housing, and in all our thinking on those fronts, we are ambitious to sort of work to the best in class climate change sustainability standards. So certainly our nursing developments going forward, we're looking at the passive house type principles, so really good standards of insulation, mitigating heat loss, etc. It's always going to be difficult in an older person's home where the people living there need levels of warmth and heat, but we are working to really understand that impact on the environment. We've got a little bit of funding to do some work on our existing portfolio of buildings, to use some sensor technology, working with the University of Hertfordshire to measure the current impact on sustainability of greenhouse gas emissions from those settings. So we'll be using that data and intelligence to help us plan how we're going to address the challenge in relation to our existing building stock. And as we take forward projects where we're going to need to work with housing providers to develop new forms of accommodation, so we won't be delivering or building them directly. As we take forward those projects, when we're going through our selection processes, we'll be seeking assurance about the sustainability credentials of the providers that we want to work with. We'll be seeking assurance about the design and making sure we're following good design principles in those projects. Think also, I was really interested actually, just by the by, to read the Sustainability Hertfordshire Impact Assessment for the Adult Disability Accommodation Strategy. There's absolutely loads in there, and it's a bit of an eye-opener really about just how many aspects that need to be considered in our building programmes. So that will be coming through to panel in February, and I'm sure the members of the panel will be interested to read all of that analysis that's been done to accompany that strategy. In terms of our day-to-day business, so I think it's fair to say COVID.
Keep it a bit brief, Helen, but yes, yeah.
Okay, I was just going to say, in terms of day-to-day business, I think one of the key challenges then, to keep it brief, will be about travel. We will always want to meet people face to face. As Councillor Nash mentioned, we've got a little project underway to look at an electrification of our fleet. We've certainly got the first vehicle underway. That's a drop in the ocean. So we've got to look at our own fleet. And also we've got to work with providers. How can we work with them? What do they need from the council to incentivise them to move towards more sustainable forms of travel? So I think we've made a good start, but lots of work to do. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, that was going to be one of the points I was going to follow up on. Is a lot of staff in this field will be using their own vehicles and receiving a mileage allowance. So what? And not everybody can afford to just go out and buy, change their car and buy themselves a new electric vehicle. So it's a question of what incentives we can offer people to use more sustainable sort of travel.
Yeah, I think for me that's the kind of thing where we will want to think corporately about the best way to approach that question. I'm sure colleagues in HR and finance will be thinking about that issue and how we can work with staff around that. I'm sure there'll be options about electric cars where we are, where colleagues are leasing cars. So I think for us it's something that we're really keen to promote. We're looking forward to the new Director of Sustainability coming to post and working closely with that person when they arrive to develop that approach, and travel and transport across our department will be a key issue for us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And the key thing is it's on your radar, which I think we just want to be assured. I mean, one quick comment I'd make. I went out with one of the people in the Hertfordshire Independent Living Services and went round with her, which was a very, very inspiring morning. What was striking was the close relationship that your team has with their clients, or Hills's team have with their clients. And I do wonder as well, what role in terms of promoting energy efficiency with some of the clients and actually helping them with this agenda is something that we might in future be thinking of, because it's quite clear that they just really had a fantastic relationship with the people that they were looking after. Very impressive. Yeah. Well, anyway, I'm glad this is on your radar. We need to move on. And the next key line of inquiry, quite an elephant, is the whole social care reform package and the implications for Hertfordshire County Council. And Ron is going to lead on the questioning here. Ron, over to you.
Thank you very much. Hi, Helen and Stella. The Health and Care Bill 2021 on pages 65 and 66 of the big book mentions that it is likely to provide some challenges over the next 3 years. Could you elaborate on that phrase, particularly referring to the question of assessments and also changes to regarding the discharge to assess model and the changes to the Better Care Fund? Thanks.
Thank you, Ron. Right, this is the future challenge, the key priority programme on implementing this social care reform along with the white paper. The details of this one that we've talked about lie with Jackie and Stephen, and I'm not going to do a large introduction to it. I'm going to get straight to the point with Jackie. So Jackie, if you could pick up on this one and please respond to Ron.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Nash. Thank you, Ron. In terms of the areas covered by the new social care reform, they are, as you say, Ron, detailed on pages 65 and 66, and cover a range of issues in terms of greater collaboration with the NHS, significant charging reforms, new proposals around the collection of data, and a new assurance framework, and changes to the legislation potentially around discharge to assess, and changes to the Better Care Fund. In terms of answering your question, Ron, about the changes to the Better Care Fund, at the moment we're waiting for the guidelines to come out in terms of the changes and in terms of the integration with the NHS. I think we're still waiting for that, so we don't have the detail around that, but we know it's coming. And in terms of what we know, sort of our partnership with our health colleagues working well at the moment has been strengthened through COVID, and with the new health structures going live in July, we are sort of waiting for the new legislation to potentially impact on the BCF, but working nationally and with the local ICS, we've not really heard anything in terms of the impact, in terms to raise any concerns about that, but we are awaiting that information. And obviously health colleagues have been very supportive through the pandemic, most recently helping us to joint fund the work retention package. So in terms of your actual questions around the Better Care Fund, I can't really answer that in terms of knowing where that's going, but we are awaiting the information.
Ron, I'm sure you're going to come back with a supplementary.
Yeah, if I can, first off, finance, which obviously is the primary reason we're here. Quite a lot of ACS programmes have additional NHS funding in support, because obviously the performance of the care sector actually impacts upon the NHS and helps them immensely. What is the progress with regard to liaison with the new structure, the integrated care services? That has any indication been given that they will wish to make changes in those funding pots that are presently agreed for this coming financial year, bearing in mind that that could affect our bottom line, if you like?
I mean, I think all the indications are that we are at the moment that we will continue as we are at the moment in terms of that funding. But I don't know if Helen's got anything else you wanted to add to that.
No, I was going to agree with you, Jackie. I think you're really well plugged into the local network of directors of finance from the health community, including the Director of Finance who leads the ICS. And I think he does appreciate the significant interrelationships between social care and health. And certainly, we've seen quite a bit of one-off short-term money come through over the winter to support with discharge schemes, etc. Obviously, the problem with that, it's short-term, and it does leave us with, potential gaps if that money were to fall away. And so we have to be careful to make sure that any schemes we do develop using short-term money, we can stand down as and when we need to. So I think it's all about really good relationships and then keeping in touch with what might happen in the forthcoming white paper on integration, so that we're well prepared for any changes that do come through. And I think, local directors of finance really understand the importance of that social care of our sector and how important that is. So I would feel that we would be relatively well supported locally through any sort of discussions around financial changes. But as Jackie says, we're not aware of anything, so I don't want to upset any hairs running.
The only other concern I've got is over assessments. I understand that the bill allows people who are currently being looked after in the private sector to ask for assessments. Will that have any impact on finance and staffing on the council budgets going forward?
Yes, I think it will, definitely, in terms of the need to, we'll be needing to assess more people. We're expecting to have more people coming to us earlier, and more people than we've had before, because the range of the changes to the financial arrangements mean that more people will potentially come through our door, both for care assessments, but also for financial assessments, as you say, Ron. And we're still working through that in terms of the volumes. That's part of the piece of work that we're going to be doing in terms of establishing what we think that impact will be on the system and planning for that. But I noticed, Mark, I don't know if Mark, you wanted to add to that.
I suppose it was just very quickly just to acknowledge that that's actually a duty we have now anyway as well, but certainly the reforms will make it more likely that people will come to us. Jackie's already mentioned that there is a workforce plan and funding to help address that, a detail of which will be made clearer the closer we get to those, and central government is looking at specific tailored graduate programmes to allow us to employ more social workers, for example, which is where probably the area of impact will be the most significant.
Thank you very much.
I've got Nigel with his hand up.
Thank you, Chair. And I think actually Mark then just came in with the answer, almost the answer. I was going to say, surely with Ron's question, we're going to need more staff because they're going to have to carry out more assessments. So that's going to have to be put in there. But I can understand that Mark came back largely with that, saying that we've got some sort of duty already, but there's clearly in the new bill with us, there's going to be more people coming to us for more assessments. So we're surely going to have to take on more officers for that anyway in the future.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And the question therefore is, does this integrated plan actually sufficiently take that into account? That's the question that we have. I apologise, I seem to be losing my voice. Stephen, you're going to come in here and make a comment. That's Stephen Pilsworth.
Yes, just very quickly, if I can, to sort of give the Chief Finance Officer perspective on this, because it is a big risk item in the IP. And as such, you will actually see in Part A of the IP that covers the overall budget, there is a lot of reference to social care reform, including in my CFO statement. I have a statutory duty to advise Council on the robustness of the budget, and care reform is one issue I'm flagging. For exactly the reasons that Jackie, Mark and Helen have flagged, there is a quite high level of uncertainty on it at the moment in terms of what the likely demand and cost might be, but also the government funding, how that will be allocated and whether that will be enough. And of course, Chair, as you said right in your opening remarks, adult care is the biggest budget the council has, so any changes can have a significant financial impact. So the budget has to assume that the impact is neutral, the government funding is sufficient for all the issues we've mentioned. Almost at the moment, we can't make any other assumption, but of course worth flagging, of course, a lot of this doesn't hit next year, it hits the year after. So we are working towards this. And to say, obviously, I've been working with Jackie, Helen, Chris and Mark around the possible impacts on this, and I've been sort of impressed to see how they're moving it forward and how the work around care reform is aligned to all the other programmes and change programmes the department have got, and looking across it as a whole. And also, of course, in terms of those links into government and lobbying, you might be aware that Chris is the resources lead on the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services, so that puts him at the heart of those discussions, and indeed Mark with the links into DHSC, Department of Health and Social Care. So as an organisation, we're right at the forefront of those discussions and flagging those issues, and will continue to refine those estimates and risk profile as we get nearer and nearer implementation date. And it will be a collective corporate risk we manage across the council, not just within the department.
We have heard that word risk loud and clear. Ron,
and could I come back with a very specific question on the risk? Stephen, you mentioned the funding. Would you consider it more of a risk if the funding for the social care and the impact of the social care bill actually is received before the fair funding decisions are made by government? Because it's my understanding that county would benefit from the fair funding review. If that doesn't take place before this funding is sorted out, then we could have the cart before the horse, as it were.
Okay. probably a couple of things in response to that, if I can. And for those who don't know, the Fair Funding Review is the government looking at the overall arrangements for how it allocates funding to councils. So it currently has a formula that allocates sort of the national pie of funding to all councils, and it has committed that it will look at that next year. It's been on the agenda for quite some time, but it's saying it will do. Actually, I am not sure whether fair funding will benefit councils like Hertfordshire. There seems to be, in line with the levelling up agenda, a suggestion that councils that get a lot of income from council tax might actually lose in the fair funding arrangements. So, yeah, that's point number one. Secondly, in terms of the adult care reform money, it all depends how government decides to allocate that, whether it does get incorporated within the regular formula arrangements or whether actually there is an entirely separate mechanism for allocating that funding. And perhaps just to give you an example as to why they might consider that, the regular formula for adult care takes into account deprivation, numbers of older people, things like that. Whereas actually some of the funding that might come out, for example, relating to care cap and equalisation of care is heavily determined by the number of self-funding people you have in your area, not something that's currently reflected in that current formula. So they might decide to do something entirely separate. Either way, I think we as a council individually and collectively with partners and other councils through ADAS, through the county councils network, need to be lobbying on both fronts.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Chair.
I think we've all heard that just what a area of risk this is, and we will ponder when we come to make our recommendations following this morning's session. We now move on to the fifth line of inquiry, which is another elephant, and that is ACS's transformation model, in which an awful lot of expectations are clearly invested. And Nigel is going to lead the questioning on this. Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. And obviously the set question was basically about how the transformation project is forecast to be one of the overall greatest savings to the council. We know that the greatest spend is adult care, and given how significant these savings could be, would the service be able to go into greater depth on how they plan to reach their annual efficiency saving target of 4%? And obviously this has already been touched anyway in the original question at the start with D, and it's come up other times. And looking at the top of page 67, obviously, and already it was mentioned earlier about working anyway with Hertfordshire Partnership Foundation Trust to deliver that annual efficiency target. But I am interested in that it does say, and I know that Jackie said earlier, that the savings in the first 2 years having been impacted by the COVID pandemic, but the full level of original savings will still be achieved by 2024-25, and that's on E11. So I'm still interested in how you are so confident you are still going to achieve that. And obviously, looking at the on the papers, I'm sure you've all got the papers and know what I mean, but obviously that then basically refers on page 74 to OP137. I know it's difficult if people are just watching this and don't have the papers, but obviously that's looking at the investment in the key thing, which is our Connect programme, investment in strengthening Connect and Prevent in line with Connected Lives, and this links with the new efficiency savings. But so I'm just wondering on NE24. So just wondered if you could start and come back to say if this really is still on track despite COVID. I'm interested in how you can sort of say prove it or actually show that.
Yes, indeed. There's a number of savings in the IP under transformation under the Partnership Foundation Trust and Connect, as you rightfully said, and Prevent and the 4 disability strategies as well. The transformation for services for people with learning disabilities are within the 4 disability strategy savings and the Connect and Prevent transformation proposals. However, there are further details to the transformation savings, and Mark wants to speak to this, so I'm going to hand over to Mark.
Thank you. Yes, I'll touch on each of the bits in the detail, but I'm conscious, as you know, Councillor Bell, that we have mentioned some of these previously. So if we don't cover it, do let me know. I think just to start with, in terms of the mental health transformation programme, I think in part our confidence is firstly the close working relationship we have with Hertfordshire Partnership Foundation Trust. We worked extensively with them to model this and understand how they can achieve it, and how they can achieve it in the best way, in the way that doesn't negatively impact in terms of delivery. And to that end, there's been quite a lot of investment from the council to support them to do this. So I think we previously mentioned significant capital investment for new enablement pathways, significant investment in their negotiation strategies with care providers. And I think one of the things in terms of the mental health transformation is that actually we get a double positive out of this, because we know that quite a lot of the social care expenditure there is in long-term residential nursing type care, and we know from people who receive services that's not what they want. They want to be living locally in Hertfordshire, in their communities, near their families. So this investment allows us to do both things, have a much better outcome for those individuals, and be able to support HPFT to make sure they've got the right care and support systems to be able to deliver that. So we are working with them very closely. We meet with them regularly to look at progress towards this work. They've recently tendered for a new framework for community support, so that actually they've got much better strength and skill within the community, rather than having to rely on specialist residential units, which often are outside of Hertfordshire. And that's nothing that any of us really want. So I think we have some confidence in that, in terms of their commitment, and are closely working with them to achieve that. And whilst we talk quite a lot about it being HFT's savings, and they do, it's for them to deliver and support, it is part of our partnership arrangement. So so we are, as I say, very supportive of that. In terms of adult disability, which is my area, I think we do have the 4 key areas. We are confident in the extent that we have very much spent a lot of time working these up and understanding the impact. And a little bit like some of the mental health strategies, there is a double positive about this, because it's the right thing to do as well for people in Hertfordshire. So we are looking at a much better approach around supporting people around education, employment, rather than just transactional approaches straight into long-term daycare services, etc. And again, we know with our work with children's services, where the future of this spend will be coming from, is very positive. We know that young adults and their families want to be active citizens in Hertfordshire, not people just in receipt of social care. So we've got a drive already from younger adults supporting this, and the commissioners there and our colleagues in children's services to move that forward. The other 2 key bits there are particularly around, again, our accommodation strategy, the development of new supported living accommodation, which again, Hertfordshire residents tell us that's what they want. They want their own tenancies, they want to live as part of communities. That in itself is a more efficient approach to delivering care. It puts the housing ownership in the right place, it gives people access to the right benefits and income to be able to have their own tenancies, and therefore we can then target outreach-based care that's more supportive. So we've done a lot of mapping with this. We have very clear plans to be able to do this. The council again has invested additional support for us to be able to do this. So we have a good workforce looking at the accommodation strategy. We've got a good new negotiation team working with providers around the right price, the right hours, and the right care for individuals. And so just very lastly on the adult disability element is obviously we have the Connected Lives model, and we have a social work and an occupational therapy workforce who are dedicated to delivering this. So the right care packages for people is going to be really key for us going forward. Chair, did you want me to just quickly touch on the connect and prevent element, or pause?
I think probably that's enough. Nigel, do you have any follow-up?
Yeah, I was saying thanks for that detailed reply from Mark. So there's therefore, from the point of view of the money and the savings, does that link in then to on page 75 NE24 and those savings from, you know, obviously 23-24 from 2.5 down to 25-26, that those still, if everything you say goes ahead, that those figures will be on track as far as we can see. Sorry,
so I'm having struggle accessing some of the files, so I might have to defer to Jackie just to help me with which ones those actually are. But
yeah, the NE24 page 75.
Yeah. So I think NE24 is the connect and prevent transformation, the new transformation mark. So in terms of our new sort of prevention model.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I just to take you through that. I mean, I think again, yes, they are absolutely linked to that. And our new Connect and Prevent model, which builds on our Connected Lives model, is a very clear focus. As was mentioned at the start, around transformation is actually putting the right care in the right place. So we will be looking to invest quite significantly our front door services, so that people have a professional response early on, so that we can enable people to be resilient, access their community, and not necessarily go on a straight transactional pathway into receiving social care. We know the quicker you come into social care, the more likely you will end up staying in it. And actually, we want to really change that focus. So if we can do that and manage the volume of referrals and get the right arrangement, so going back to that demand management term, which I won't use, but that will make a significant impact on what we do. It will reduce our long-term spend. It means we'll be putting the right care in at the right time for people. And I think there is some evidence, even if I reflect on my own services, that we rely a bit too quickly on a volume of care, not necessarily enabling the individual to live the right life, which is what the Care Act is all about for us. So we're definitely looking to do that. We know there is clear evidence the more occupational therapy usage we get in early, the better the outcome for the individual and the less reliance on social care and social care costs. So if we can get the right equipment, if we can enable people to stay living within their homes but learning to do that in a new way, that has such a significant impact. And there's lots of research that we've drawn on. We are improving our access to evidence base to this, so it's not just ideas, it's actually drawn from national research and evidence that we're pushing through.
Thank you, Mark. Helen, did you want to come in on that quickly?
Yeah, just very briefly, Chairman, I just wanted to comment on the 4% figure. I think that was just specifically in relation to HPFT. That was the challenge we set HPFT when they developed their savings programme. So there isn't a 4% efficiency target across the rest of the portfolio. And, you know, quick calculation of the amount of savings that we're for 22-23 is more on the lines of 1%. So I just wanted to offer that sort of clarification on that point.
That is useful clarification.
Thanks for that. Sorry, Chair, can I just one more?
Very exceedingly briefly, Nigel. We're this is important.
Yeah, this probably be Mark again. But the other thing linked to that on my question was, is there a plan for a similar transformation model for people with learning disabilities, given that they are the highest individual costs users of the system? And obviously your example on the top of page 69, where you say we know there's a significant cost coming through from younger adults with very complex needs. And while the number of individuals needing social care is lower than older age groups, we know that those with significant physical and learning disabilities can be 10 times the cost of supporting an older person. So we may have more older people, but we can have 10 times more the cost for people who are young with complex. So how are we going to, solve that, if you like?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I probably wasn't very clear. So the new Connect and Prevent programme that we're developing will be totally applicable to adult disability services. So actually not just learning disability, physical disability, long-term conditions, our drug and alcohol work that we do on a day-to-day basis. So the development of this programme gives us a single, almost social services type approach to that front door. So it is equally accessible. We've been doing a lot of work over the past couple of years in terms of people with learning disabilities also having access to the right healthcare pathways as well, because if we get that right, that has less impact on health inequality and therefore less requirement for intensive social care support. So yes, absolutely, that new Connect and Prevent pathway, that front door system, will be applicable to all citizens that need access to social care in the first instance, and we will make sure that it is reasonably adjustive and responsive to all those needs.
Thank you. I can see that Calvin has his hand up. So Calvin.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are, I'll try and make it a quick follow-up to what Nigel's just asked. I notice at the top of page 75, you've got savings in adult disability services, and they are very much around getting people into the right accommodation, supported living. One of the key things about that is getting reviews, timely reviews. I'm concerned whether that is the case at the moment, but I'm wondering whether there might be risks around that with regard to making sure that the accommodation strategy is in place in time, but also about having adequate levels of staffing within the social work team. So I wonder whether you could comment upon those two things. Thank you.
Absolutely. So a very key challenge for us is doing that. We have, in acknowledgement of that, we have done quite a lot of work this year in adult disabilities to improve our review rates despite the COVID pandemic. So we have actually improved the review rates over the last 3 quarters. The council has invested, so I mentioned that we had significant investment, about 1.5 million into these transformation programmes. Some of that money is inclusive of dedicated reviewing professionals, so that we can make sure that they are dedicated alongside some of the transformation programs. So the renegotiation work also requires us to do reviews. We can't just renegotiate care packages without the user's voice. So we have dedicated social workers linked to that, and we will have dedicated social workers linked to the development of accommodation as and when it happens across the board. So that investment is on top of the current social work workforce that we have. So that won't therefore have an unintended impact on our ability to run day-to-day social care for adults. And lastly, I think Helen's already mentioned, and Stephen, some of the investment around our waiting lists. As I mentioned earlier, waiting lists often include people that are very well known to us and having care, but they're due their review, and that's the wait. So we can then use that investment to pick up on some of that as well. It is absolutely a challenge. It links very much to that workforce question we had earlier, but we do have plans in place to mitigate that.
Right, thank you. Ron, I'm really sorry, we really have to move on to the next key line of inquiry. If it's relevant, you can ask later if the question is still burning inside you. But I think that's
I'll save it.
No, Ron, please. We're going to move on to the next key line of inquiry, actually. And then if there's a burning, if it's relevant, you can come back. But we really need to keep on track with the agenda. And this is kind of cognate to what we have just been discussing, because John is going to just poke away at the issues around demography and the increasing numbers of users of the service. So, John, over to you.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. The users of the service are expected to continue to increase, and as I read the papers, there seems to be 2 key pressures on that. One is demography, as set out on the plan, and the other one I sense is on page 64. You're showing the people coming into long-term care out of the NHS. Those are the 2 areas I saw in the papers. But yeah, we look at the future pressures and the capital programme bids, and there doesn't seem to be an equivalent growth in the revenue and the capital budgets, particularly when you look at the increase in the revenue budget and you take out the 18 million that we've already been talking about. And it may be that some of the answer is on the last line of inquiry, but I suppose fundamentally what this question is asking, we've heard the word challenge quite a lot in this process. You know, is this budget deliverable given the pressures that adult care are facing?
And really, it's whether the numbers stack up is what we're asking. You know, the increase in users, and yet apparently not a parallel increase in the budget bids. Doesn't look like it.
The population, I mean, let's assess the population has been impacted by COVID greatly, and we have seen, unfortunately, a reduction in numbers reflected in current year's budget and last year's integrated plan. The increased fund in current integrated plan takes numbers back to the levels pre-COVID for older people, with an increase for 22-23. However, in balance, there are absolutely some uncertainties. However, we have a strategy, we have a plan for dealing with this. And again, Helen wants to speak to this, please.
Helen.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Nash. I was just going to point out as well, if it was helpful, on page 72, where you've got the just under the title of key budget movements, you've got the little table there, which I think is helpful in showing the amount of demography funding that's coming into the integrated plan for adult care services. So starting in 22-23, you've got that £21.6 million, and that's, just to be clear, in addition to the other funding that's going in for inflationary and care worker wage pressure. So, you know, I think there has been a significant uplift really in the demography provision for the department, and that will help us deal with the numbers, the increasing numbers of people going through. That's a bigger uplift than we'd normally have seen for adult care services typically, but these have been very uncertain times, and what we experienced in the first half of 21-22 was a significant increase in the number of people coming forward, particularly in the older people's area, but also in ADS. And so that demography is reflecting and providing for provision for those individuals, and also making provision for people who will come through to the service in the years ahead. So I think in terms of how that's then distributed, we keep an eye on it. So if our strategy overall is for more people to be supported in home settings, fewer people to be supported in residential care. And so as we go through the years, we choose where to deploy that demography money to make sure it's put in the right budget lines to reflect the pressures that are in each of the areas. And sometimes we can use that in a sort of one-off fashion to correct pressures that might be apparent in, for example, the equipment service. And then I think in terms of the future, so we've been experiencing this population growth for some time now. I think there's a very useful table in the narrative that talks about the amount of population we've already seen in adult care service, the amount of growth we've already seen since 2010, 20% already. And we've been aware of that for a number of years, and we've been planning in our strategic work, in our long-term work, for how we will meet that. And so you've seen in the capital programme those investments going in for extra care housing, for nursing, and the new one coming in for the adult disability strategy. So that's all about, we know that people thrive better, do better when they've got good accommodation going in to support them. We know that we've got that growing population. We know that we need to invest in those new forms of accommodation to support that growth. So it does feel to me like we've got a good reflection and a good provision for meeting that growth as it comes through. But a lot of work to do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So, John, are you any follow-up, or are you content?
Yeah, just one more challenge, Helen. Thank you for the explaining that 21 million demography. If I add that to the 18 million we've talked about earlier on the staff, I come to virtually all of the increase that we see in the revenue budget in the IP. Is there any provision for increased demand outside the demography and the wage inflation? Because really that's what's underlying this question.
Is there any? I suppose. I mean, I think it's that pot of demography money that's going to allow us to meet that increased demand, and it's also the work that we'll do, as we talked earlier in the session, about making sure we've got the right offer for people. So handling that demand also through prevention, deferring, delaying ongoing need for care. So I think it's that two-pronged approach that we're taking to deal with the pressures that we'll undoubtedly face in the future.
Yeah, OK. Thank you. Thank you, Sandy.
Very interesting discussion. And indeed, the next question, which is going to be led, actually, Stephen has hand up. Stephen, you're going to add some wisdom. So some quick wisdom, please.
I wouldn't go that far, but I mean, John, your summary of the high level numbers are absolutely spot on. Worth also flagging that next year the department has a savings programme that will deliver about £5 million of savings, and effectively also some of that then gets reinvested. So there's some other lines, including, for example, the £1 million investment in domestic abuse that's within the department. So whilst we can look at and inevitably we often look at the really big numbers, the one you've described, the demography and the funding for care worker pay, there are some other line items such as that which are much smaller, but in many respects as important, and will have a big impact and make a big difference, including helping with the domestic abuse strategy.
Thank you, Jackie. I'm really sorry, but I think we have to move on to the next section.
Yes, I just really wanted to make a very quick point just to give John some reassurance that normally in demography we would have about £9 million would have been the demography, and the demography this year is that we're putting in is 21 million. So absolutely fine. Just really wanted to make that point in terms of that increased demand and to give some reassurance in terms of the level of that investment.
That's a useful clarification.
Thank you very much.
We will move on to the seventh area, which actually sort of follows up from this, and that is looking at the overall map of different services, statutory, voluntary, etc., etc. And Richard wants to tease out some questions on this. So Richard, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Chairman. I have to say, what a lovely segue. I mean, we're talking about transformation, and we're talking about increased numbers of users, and clearly the service is trying to manage in a proper way, not ignore, but manage in a proper way its capacity and how they help people. So my question, which of course is on the paper, which will have been circulated to you, so I won't read it again, but essentially it's a question of communication and the capacity of people to understand where help may be. And essentially, if you're going to make your transformation work and you're going to deal with those increased in numbers, you've got to make to maximise the capacity to interrelate and integrate with other providers. So you see where the thrust of my question is going. So perhaps you could just give us a few words on how you see that working and what needs to be funded or resourced in terms of mapping to enable people to help themselves more readily.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Regarding the mapping, adult care services is interconnected and well placed in the landscape of Hert's social care districts, voluntary care services, relationships with voluntary care services, districts and health have been strengthened, and through COVID we have become stronger. However, links with district housing boards and through support for homeless and adults with complex needs and the domestic abuse key players are emerging in the integrated care system, and Helen is going to pick up on that.
Councillor Nash, I could talk at length about how interconnected we are, but I get the sense that the question is more about our communications approach and how we reach people who are perhaps more not connected into the online world. I was going to hand that bit over. You're
absolutely right. That really is the thrust, and I think it's something that Health Watch are particularly keen about too.
So Jackie.
Oh, right. Thanks, Helen. Yes. So in terms of the question, Rich, I mean, it is an issue for us in terms of helping people to navigate their way around all of the different support networks that we have. And in terms of the question as it's written about Hert's Help and it being a facility online and being clear, are we reaching people? So Hert's Help, just for people who don't know, is the telephone support line that we have, and it is a telephone line, and we've widely promoted it through leaflets. The NHS winter leaflet went to every household. We have face-to-face community navigators, and we have events that promote Hert's Help. We've got the VCS community provision. We have leaflets in GP surgeries, across the Healthy Hub network, in schools and in libraries, and basically all of those we have the telephone number and the website for those who are connected, and social media. So in terms of that, we're really trying to make sure that connection gets out in terms of what the offer is and making sure that it is connected. And Hert's Help is our gateway through for people to navigate the various supports that they might need in the community. Through COVID was particularly an issue of trying to make sure that those people that were clinically extremely vulnerable that we were trying to reach, which we did through letters, but also making sure that we sort of reinvested in bus shelters, with posters in supermarkets, and making sure that we're linked in with sort of public health notices that are going out to people and to houses, making sure that Hert's Help message is really clear. We're also making sure that we pick up with word of mouth and making sure that partnerships are fully engaged. And just to give a sense of the size of it, we made Hert's Help made calls, as in telephone calls, to 62,000 residents were contacted by telephone in the last year. 34,000 were inbound calls and 28,000 were outbound. And that compares to 21,000 email contacts that they had on top of that. So to give a sense of the scale of that organisation, but you're right, it is a challenge in terms of getting that message out there, and it's a challenge that we continually use to make sure that we're really reaching all of the communities and making sure some of those hard to reach communities that we're really being clear that we've got proposals to get messages out.
Can I just quickly follow up, Sandy. I mean, thank you for that. Very clear. Embedded in it, of course, not asked, was are you convinced that we are sufficiently resourced in that area to meet that challenge?
Quick answer, Jackie.
Sorry, resourced in terms of being able to reach people, or the
the fiscal and human resources are you sufficient? Are you convinced that there's sufficient in the IP proposals for your department to meet those challenges?
Well, yes, actually, in terms of we had a significant investment in last year in terms of the integrated plan for the VCS, making sure that we had a COVID response. And actually, because we've been able to use government funding that's come through to support various areas, we've actually got the money that we can carry forward, which is why we haven't put a significant bid in for next year. So because we've been able to utilise government funding for the same for what our proposals were, we've got money that we can extend into next year. So hopefully that answers your question, Richard.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sandy.
The answer briefly, as far as you're concerned, is yes. I have Meg Carter coming in now. Meg is from Hertfordshire Health Watch. She's here officially as a member of this evidence gathering group representing that organisation. Meg, over to you.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you. And thank you for Jackie's reply, which is helpful. I think from our point of view, absolutely key is in terms of communication is how well that's understood by the reader of the communication and how accessible the language and the wording is. And it is real. I mean, you have gone some way to answer the question, because my issue is how much can you invest in making sure the readers of your information and the listeners to the information that you're imparting actually do understand the real meaning and the transformation, what you're intending to achieve, because there is a tension in a service that's wanting to encourage independence, which we'll all endorse and all support, but actually the tension is that sometimes that means the service is actually hard to get. And I think it's that very, very fine quality of communication that helps the community understand the very good intention behind what the plan is intended to achieve. And so I guess I'm interested to know how much you invest in something very simple, like how leaflets and how conversations actually are worded.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of the COVID response, we often had to work at pace in order to get that out. But we are looking in terms of reviewing all of our leaflets and making sure we're just going through reviewing all of our comms for Hearts Help and the messages, and looking to co-produce that in terms of making sure that users of the services are involved in actually developing those leaflets and making sure that they make sense. And if can point you to the 3-year plan, really clear messages from people that co-produce the 3-year plan was about the way we communicate with people and making sure that the messages we give people are clear and understood and in a format that really helps people, because actually there's no good having great services if we can't tell people about it and they don't know about it. And so really challenging in terms of that leaflet, and we're looking to redesign the Hearts Help website so that it's more accessible, much easier for people to understand, but we're doing that in a co-produced way so that we can really get people's views on board and make sure that what we develop is actually people can use it and is in a language that they understand and that makes sense for people, but then also making sure that in terms of those leaflets that they are then accessible and out there, and then looking at the way we're actually monitoring the people that actually contact Hearts Help to make sure that we're getting that even coverage. And then if we're not getting, if there are areas that we feel like we're missing, we're focusing on what can we do to improve that in terms of those messaging.
Well, thank you. I think Meg, I'm sorry, I think we're getting close to the end game, but I think the message I'm hearing here is that Jackie and colleagues should be plugging into Meg and her colleagues at Health Watch and getting their input as we develop and refine the way that we communicate with people. It's a very useful intervention, Meg. Thank you. We have one last topic that we are covering, and it's certainly not the least, and that is the whole issue of domestic abuse. And Steve, is going to ask a question here. Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Sandy. Thank
You're
you.
very quiet, Steve.
Does that help? Is that?
You're still very quiet.
Oh, okay, I'll shout as loud as I can if that helps. I do apologise.
Yes.
Yeah, first of all, thank you. As I said at the start, as a new councillor, these sessions are very, very informative. It's better than any training session, and I've learned so much. So thank you to all the information, particularly interested in Jackie's feedback on the Hearts Help, really useful, so thank you for that. My question is, obviously with lockdown we've seen increases in domestic abuse. There is a welcome increase in funding for this service. I understand it to be £1 million from central government, but I just wonder if we can go into some greater depth on exactly what that 1 million will be spent on. And also, how are we going to measure at the end of it whether it is actually successful or not? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, you're absolutely right. During the pandemic, it went up significantly, domestic abuse, along, unfortunately, with some homicides as well attached to it. So we have put a lot of work into this, and it is an ongoing plan for us. The latest domestic abuse strategy will be coming to our panel in February, which it sets up our priorities to respond to domestic abuse. I will get to what you're saying, Steve, in terms of the investment in the integrated plan. Our priorities are to support those with medium and standard risk, as we know that 70% of the victims are medium and standard risk. We plan to prioritise areas of focus based on the evidence from the Pathway project, which involved over 640 victims of abuse in Hertfordshire. So everything that they have said and contributed has been incorporated and considered in our strategy. And this increasing awareness about domestic abuse and identifying where to go for help for both the victims and for agencies that may be approached for support. We're also looking for developing clear pathways and develop coordinated support by agencies working together. So I know you understand that we're not just doing this on our own, we're doing it in partnership with, and we're also developing one-stop shops with counselling, therapeutic side attached to it, financial and legal support, because domestic abuse just doesn't stop when the person leaves the home. It's an ongoing, their lives are changed dramatically, often forever, and never go back to where they were. So what we're looking to do is support to grow the strategy. And we are taking this very, very seriously in Hertfordshire. But I know Jackie also wants to speak with this as well. And the £1 million investment is on top of what we already have. It's not just what we have in the budget. Thank you,
Jackie, if you can be pithy, because we are really at the end of the session.
Yes, I will try to. So just wanted to be clear, as Stella alluded to, that the £1 million is on top of the government funding. So the government have provided £2.3 million worth of grant for safe accommodation, and that is our new statutory responsibility as a Tier 1 authority. This £1 million is on top of that. And as Stella said, it is to address, our priority is to address the medium and standard risk. So that additional funding, I just thought it might be helpful to just describe what medium risk means for people. So in terms of what that is where there's identifiable indicators of serious risk, but the perpetrator has the potential to cause serious harm, but is unlikely to do so unless there's a change of circumstances. But risk with domestic abuse is pretty fluid, and people move between the different risk levels. And it's really important that we have support networks for medium and standard risk. just to be clear, most of our domestic homicide reviews are victims where they were at medium and standard risk. So it is a really, really critical area for us, and people do move between the risk levels really clearly. Our proposals, as Stella said, is about increasing awareness, making sure people are aware what domestic abuse is, and its full range of issues in terms of coercive control, financial control, as well as domestic violence. And making sure that we have got really clear pathways, that we've got one front door, that people know where to go for help. And that's another thing similar to the previous item about communication, making sure people are aware of what's available. One of the really big things is about providing outreach workers for people, which sometimes are called community IDVAs. And I note your point, Sam, that's independent domestic violence advocates. So they're similar. They provide that similar advocate one-to-one support, a single point of contact for victims at that medium risk, making sure that they've got safety planning and action planning in place, helping victims to understand what's happened to them and to try and reduce trauma, and helping find and link them to support and sometimes onward referral, helping them with things like housing applications. And the support tends to be longer than those at the high risk, who tend to need immediate high level intensive support. But really it's to attempt that stop of escalation to high risk, which should have a positive impact on services. So I've tried to do that as quickly as I can by making sure I give it the right approach and right focus.
Thank you, Jackie. I've got Peter with a final question.
Yeah, thank you. Just very quickly, is there, I mean, because obviously we're talking about funding and issues, is there some duplication with services that are provided? There are charities or independently run services like helplines and such like that for domestic violence. So if there is that duplication, is there any way we could sort of streamline that to make it more efficient?
I mean, I think what we found out through the Pathway project and the work we've done in terms of establishing what's the support that's available, Peter, it is patchy. So there are areas that it isn't consistent across Hertfordshire. And part of what we want to do is pull that together, work with partners to make sure that we can direct people and have a coordinated approach. In terms of the duplication, I don't think it tends to be duplication. It tends to be bits where there are services missing, in terms of there are areas that don't have the right level of support, and so it's about making sure that we've got a more even level of support across the county. But we are working with partners as well to prioritise where we need to put that approach to make sure we've got a more even coverage across the county, but actually looking to invest in this area, because there are areas that don't have support at all.
I think, Peter, just to confirm what Jackie said there, and that is that we now have significant investment going into this. And so what you've just said, where there is gaps, where this is going to help really join and unite and bring it together as one. So there's not sort of bits and pieces on the peripheral edges. So it started and now it's going to grow and continue to grow, and the partnership will allow that to happen with the police, NHS and police and crime Commissioner.
Yeah, no, I just mentioned it because I remember getting a request for locality budget funding towards the domestic violence abuse helpline.
Yeah.
And, so I was just wondering if that's something that we're doing in house. Then
I think it's complementary, Peter, is the message I'm getting from Jackie and Stella, and I think that it's it's filling in the gaps. Reinforcing one another, making sure that we're all talking to one another. But I think it's quite clear that people will continue to be interested and getting feedback and understanding of how effective this is being. It's a horrible issue, and I mean, it's good to see the extra money being put in. Ron, I'm really sorry, we are absolutely at the end of the session. We have run over, so I do need to draw this discussion to a close. I'm just quickly asking, is there any member of OSC who is listening in who has any question that they want to ask? But really, otherwise, I do need to wrap this up because there's work to be done before we make our recommendations. But if I'm not seeing anyone put their hand up, I'm going to say that I'm drawing this to a close now. I want to thank Stella and her officers for answering the questions with such a gracious style and complete answers. It's been a very, very useful session. We've all learnt a lot. I think we have teased out one or two issues which we will doubtless want to pursue, but thank you all very much. And to my colleagues on the evidence gathering session, we were supposed to reconvene at 11:20, but we're finishing rather late. So I hope that Natalie confirmed that 11:25 will do. But Natalie, are you comfortable with that, or do you want it to be 11:30?
I'm just having a quick look at the programme in terms of what your schedule was like. Just bear with me.
We're slightly over. We've run about 8 minutes over.
I think you can have a break of 20 minutes, because I can imagine that most people do need to get a cup of tea, etc. So I think you could probably run till past, and then reconvene for 30 minutes with your summary and recommendations.
Then that's fine. Then, colleagues, we will reconvene at 11:30 to listen to Natalie's summary, but then come up with our own recommendations. Thank you all very much. And Stella, thank you, Helen and colleagues. Thank you all.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
You're live, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And can I just start by just saying thank you to all of you, because I thought you were a brilliant team. And I thought that was proper budget scrutiny, and the fact that we had them fumbling for individual pages of the budget pack showed the day we'd done our reading, and it made sure that they did their reading as well. So I just want to say thank you, because I thought it went well, and I apologise for people I wasn't able to call. I know Ron had a couple of questions, but as it was, we did slightly run over, but we did, I think, okay, and that's thanks to you all asking crisp and to the point questions. So thank you.
Andy, if you'd have given him time to ask those, he'd have come up with 2 more and then 2 more. So
now.
Don't worry, Sandy. I've made a note of them and I shall bring them up at the cabinet panel.
Brilliant. And Richard, you know Councillor Tyndall all too well, but there we are. Now, so Natalie, you're on parade first, just to give your summary of what you think that we discussed. But I do want to stress to everybody that this is just Natalie's objective listening in, and she had time to write stuff down. It is still up to us to come up with our recommendations to go forward to OSC. So Natalie, over to you.
Sorry, Sandy. It's you're going to have the delights of Fiona rather than
Fiona instead. Well, that's equally delightful. So Fiona, over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Sandy. And as Sandy said, this is, I've just listened to your discussion and I picked out this, what, as an outsider listening to it, sounds like the key points. So I'll summarise some of the key points, and then I'll let you know where I think you might be having some conclusions that you might want to report to Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and where your recommendations might lie. And then once I've run through that, I'll hand back over to you to discuss what you want to do with it. So. It was a really good evidence gathering session, and I think that the executive member and officers were able to provide some really thorough answers and some really strong answers to the all the key lines of inquiry. They certainly highlighted that that they've got that adult care services have got a strong track record of achieving savings, and some of those examples were highlighted, which was, gave some helpful reassurance. And, other key points that you delved into that I think we had some reassuring answers to that you had were, the increase in numbers in demography and the significant level of additional funding to address that's coming through in this budget. And around sustainability, I think there were some very reassuring answers about how sustainability is at the forefront of planned projects, such as looking at passive house designs for new buildings and facilities, and also the more gradual work that's ongoing, like replacing vehicle fleets, and really importantly that commitment from partners to the council's sustainability goals, which is built into all the work that they're doing with partners. I think that the information that you heard and the questions you asked around domestic abuse were, and the work that the council are doing around domestic abuse were really important, and obviously something that is an area that needs to have that. That they need to have that same offer to everyone around the whole of Hertfordshire, which clearly hasn't been the case. That support and help needs to be there for everyone, and I think that the work being done, it was clear, rather than duplicating, it's all about filling in the gaps. And I think that I think it seemed to me that the members of this group really welcomed that work, and that might be something that you want kind of on record to report back to Overview and Scrutiny Committee. There was discussion around the better care funding formula, and it seemed to me, obviously, that there's still some element of uncertainty around that, but it seemed to me with the answers you heard, were quite robust in terms of officers, feeling confident about that there's no grounds to have fear or around that funding at the moment, which was backed up and obviously by the close relationships they've got with partners and the finance directors in the NHS. So I feel like from listening to it that you know, that was answered pretty solidly. I don't feel there was a recommendation, but that might not be how you see it. So just you know, you can discuss that. Staff recruitment and retention, that's come up as an issue in almost every portfolio that we've looked at, and clearly that's a pressure and a key issue in this portfolio. But also, again, I felt like the answers that you got around that were very reassuring around the kind of growing our own and the offer you know, that staff get in terms of training and the amount of work being done around that, and of course the additional budget going towards salaries for staff that are employed by other organisations. So I felt like that was actually very reassuring, but clearly still a key, very important issue. But so moving on to conclusions. So these are things I think would usefully be reported to Overview and Scrutiny Committee, because there might be some action that can come from them, but not they're not necessarily budget recommendations that need to go through to the budget consideration. So one of them was to recommend working with service users and linking in with Healthwatch Hertfordshire to work on the wording of comms, to make sure that it's not, you know, rather than thinking just about where and how it can be accessed, but really, you know, carefully looking at that wording so that it's understandable and really people can get the right message from it. And so I think that could be an area. Also that that panel and Health Scrutiny Committee receive updates on the social care reform bill, and also changes within the funding landscape and implications on that. So obviously these things will be impacting further down the line and are unknown at this point, but it would be very useful for the Cabinet panel and Health Scrutiny Committee to receive those updates as more is known. And also relating to waiting lists and the capacity to manage that seemed like a key area. And I think that, you know, that the answers that you had, your answers that you needed for reassurance from Mark Harvey, but it, you know, over to you really to decide whether you think there's any budget related recommendation on that, or perhaps it might be something that you feel is more suitable to ask for a report to the Cabinet panel on the waiting lists and that have been impacted by COVID and the progress on that work, because obviously that work was already happening, is ongoing, so it might be that you'd like more information about the progress on the waiting lists. So in terms of recommendations, I felt like the key area, the really important one where there's a huge risk is around the risks around the unknown funding coming from the unknown funding implications from the social care reform, and not knowing what the funding package will be. Again, I think officers answered that very robustly and very honestly and openly. You know, it clearly is a key risk, and you know, I'm not sure what what practically can be done at this point when it's so unknown. But there might be a recommendation around contingency around that risk, and looking to find some sort of contingency, because that clearly was the most, you know, the most significant thing, I think. And that's everything from me. Thanks, Sandy.
Fiona, thank you very much. And yes, I mean, risk. The big risk is clearly around the social care reform package. Ron has his hand up. Ron, is that what you were going to say, or where? Are you?
In fact, the two main points that Fiona raised, I totally agree with, and they both link to the health and care bill. And so I would suggest that we have a recommendation that it not only is reported to Overview Scrutiny, but that a report continues to be given to the Cabinet panel and monitoring of the situation, because nobody knows the answer to it. But there are two issues. There's first of all the high, and Stephen Pilsworth actually mentioned the high level of uncertainty on the funding. So that's the first issue identified by the Director of Finance.
Well, he's wearing his Section 151 hat.
Yeah,
I mean, it's pretty. It could not be more kind of somber than that, actually.
That's right. Yes, and that's the main issue. But then, of course, one of the sub issues is, of course, the request for assessments that would come as a fact of changes being included in the health and care sector, where the county are going to have to recruit additional staff to cope with the number of assessments. So I think those are the two issues that need to be kept an eye on and monitored under the bill, and wording perhaps, really is. One couple of other quick issues. First of all, under sustainability, there was no mention of care homes.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did.
Well, I must admit I didn't pick that one up.
It was probably, I agree, it was probably too focused on new homes rather than retrofitting existing.
Oh yes, no, I'm talking about the existing buildings.
Oh, retrofitting existing ones. Then I agree. They didn't
the county own a number which are managed by Quantum Care. So what are we doing in those to retrofit them for 2030? And then there's all the private providers. What are they doing? What standards are they being? And not just their own, until there is quite a large private sector out there. What are they doing about the sustainability agenda, which also counts towards our carbon footprint across the country? So
that's a reasonable question for us to put forward and to say it's our failing for having not asked it. But actually, in retrospect, we should have asked what is being done to retrofit our existing care home property portfolio.
And the only other thing I mentioned is under domestic abuse, there was no mention at all about prevention. It was all about supporting victims and survivors, which I totally support. But of course, at some point, somebody's got to grasp the nettle of how do we try and stop this stuff happening? And I know there are some prevention programs being worked on from my own involvement, but that was another issue that wasn't raised. However, I'll leave it there.
Okay, that's all useful. Fiona, I hope you're making a note of this, are you? I'm relying on you to do that. Nigel.
Yep, don't worry.
Yeah, Nigel next.
Yep. Yeah, thank you, Chair. And yeah, I was going to raise, and Ron's said it already about the assessments and Stephen coming in, and not Stephen coming in there, but the question of the assessments, and therefore on the social care reform bill, it is a risk, and it's key, as you said, that Stephen got involved as a Section 151 officer. So that's clearly something we need to put in there. So I agree with any questions Ron's got on there. And as I say, I did raise the question of assessment. So yeah, I think that's one of our main key recommendations, or one of our main points we need to come out of this. Can I just say on my question, in the actual gathering, I will be honest, in the question we had down there that looking at the transformation project and looking at the possibility of 4% efficiencies, but Jackie did come back and point out that it's not talking about efficiencies of 4%. The question was wrong. 4% for the whole of adult care. It's basically the 4% from Hertfordshire Partnership Foundation Trust.
Yeah, so, that was very useful clarification. I agree.
So basically, she's talking about 1% over of efficient. I think we're talking about a 1% across the whole of adult care, which is slightly different from saying 4%. So, I think that we need to get that into line, and if people need to remember that on this, And of course, I'm quite happy to support efficiency savings where they can be justified, but it's right to say it's 1%, not 4% across the whole piece.
Yes. The question I would have asked there, except we were running out of time.
Yeah, no, I didn't have it.
Whether any of what they're proposing is totally innovative, which always has risks that it might go wrong, or is it all based on best practice from elsewhere? And that's the question I would have asked, and I was ready to ask it, and then thought, no, we've got to get moving to cover the territory.
Yeah, we'd had time. We could have come back to Mark.
To ask.
Had time, would have come back to Mark on that. Obviously, he's the expert on it. He had lots of stuff. He's always very good at coming back with detail, but I would have come back at Mark on that. Thank you.
I mean, whether that's possible just to put in that, it would be interesting to know, and obviously it's for the cabinet panel, how much of this stuff is absolutely new, innovative, Chris Badger pushing the envelope, which is brilliant in one degree, but in the other degree, it means that we're getting into unknown territory, and how much actually Buckinghamshire saved a shed load of money by doing X, we're going to do the same. So there's two different kinds of transformation projects.
Sandy,
yes,
Richard.
Fiona,
clearly you can't put that in as a recommendation because it wasn't discussed. But my understanding is that there is the capacity of these topic groups to tack on advice or information to the scrutiny on the first. I have done so on one of my highways ones, and let them pick up the issues if they consider as the pucker OS, what they want to do with it. So
whether they want to scrutinise it or pass it back to the panel.
Yeah.
But I think I think that is a point. As I say, I would have asked that if I hadn't been conscious that I had to keep driving the programme forward. Fiona.
What Richard said is correct, and what we've got.
That Fiona, as compared to Fiona Guest.
Oh, sorry, I'm so sorry.
Fiona,
I'll be quick. Just to clarify, we've got the two. You've got your recommendations which need to feed in directly to the budget, but then you've got conclusions to be reported to OSC, to Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and that's you can capture any of that other stuff in there, and then that can be stuff
that's Richard's
panel or further scrutiny. Or okay. I'm sorry, Fiona.
Now, Fiona Guess.
Thank you, Chairman. Not to worry, Fiona Corcoran. There are 3 Fionas amongst members, and I've seen 2 amongst officers. There can't be too many Fionas, but it can get a bit confusing with there being so many of us. But what I want to home in on is the risk in the numbers of people requesting assessments, and as a result, more care packages that need to be funded, with the need for additional staff, both for assessments and for delivering care. So,
you are violently agreeing with both Nigel and John.
Violently agreeing, but beyond that, I'm quite glad that John Graham's part of this evidence gathering group as well, because this might need to be something that the audit committee needs to keep an eye on and may need to pick up. So Carly and John, can you make a note of that? This could be something that needs to be followed up by audit. And John, so you're about to speak, but you're muted.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just summarise what the point is that you want audit to pick up.
Extra resources.
It's the extra resources.
The risk in the increasing numbers of people requesting assessments, and the increased risk in the number of care packages resulting from that, and the increased risk of the need for additional staff.
Yeah, which was picked up by both Nigel and Ron during the questioning as well. So I think we're absolutely all agreed that is a major recommendation to go forward from us to the OSC. Ron, you have your hand up because clearly that's something additional.
Just a little clarification. Be careful of the word assessment, because there are a lot of words in the adult care sector where there are double or triple meanings, and in this case, when you get to assessments, it may be assessment for a care package, which is obviously needs to be prioritised, but it may also be assessment for a financial contribution or an assessment of people's financials in order to see how much they would pay, or indeed under the new care bill, a lot of the new people coming forward for assessment is because they will actually they are actually going to take advantage of one of a couple of clauses in the bill, will actually may reduce the costs to them because of the way in which the bill is enacted. So sometimes, because somebody's waiting for an assessment, if they are financial assessments, then it's not so crucial as if they're care assessments. So we need to, not be too hard on the waiting list because of that reason. So I hope that helps everybody.
Ron, as ever, your expertise blinds the rest of us, but that's very useful. Where are we now? Fiona, what have you gathered from what we've discussed so far? By the way, I'm looking very quickly at Calvin and John and Dee and Steve and Peter. Is there anything that you think that we've not covered, or do you think, gosh, why aren't they talking about X or Y?
Sandy, if I just come in terms of the numbers, if you noticed and it was good that Stephen came in at the end, they're placing a lot of reliance on this figure they put in for demography of 21 million. As though this is a lump sum got in for it, and if you notice some of the challenges made on the risks, they're going to use this demography pot quite a lot over the next year, and I couldn't find in our break any analysis in the paper about how they got to the 21.646 million.
What, for that, for demography?
Yeah, for demography.
Oh Lord, it must be a real figure, because this has been done by Stephen, so that it must be a real figure. I mean, I'm not party to how finance is done. Is anyone on resources and performance cabinet panel here?
Yes, I am.
You are. I mean, Stephen won't have put that in as a made-up figure, so it must be real additional revenue funding that has come in, presumably partially government grants, but also stuff that we've done ourselves. But is the issue that you've got that it looks like a one-off, and what happens in year 2, 3, 4 and 5?
No, because it goes on after that. It does grow bigger, okay. But it's a figure calculated by Stephen that he's put into a pot, and it looks as though the hand will come into that pot several times during the year to solve a multitude of problems. So and it may be that when you get to the end of the year, you get this time next year, and the pot is empty.
Tony Blair famously described the Lib Dem proposal of a penny in the pound on income tax as the longest P in history, because of how much we were going to, how many different things we were going to spend it on. So yes, I've been at the receiving end of that, but that's an interesting point. Fiona is wanting to say something, and Calvin has his hand up, but Fiona first. Fiona Corcoran.
Yes, thank you. So just to say that I do think Stephen Pilsworth is still here on the call.
Yes, he is, and he's put a hand up.
Okay.
Yes. So, but Stephen, actually, can you answer that, Stephen?
Well, if I could just say first, I absolutely trust Stephen's calculation, but as happens a lot of times with finance people, it's the way your functional people use the money that you grant to them. So, all yours, Stephen.
Said John hastily, as chairman of audit.
And actually, hopefully, we're pleased to know it's people who know more about this than I do who do the work on those estimates, including my adult care finance team, but also the leads in Helen's and Mark's areas, the practitioners who are really close to the services. And it is an estimate. It can only be an estimate and a forecast. What might be the demand for care services next year, either from new people coming through and needing services, existing users whose need might deteriorate, the impact of some of the discharge arrangements and how COVID might drive that. There's a lot of work looking at it, but of course it can only ever be an estimate and forecast. And then I also know how closely that the finance team and the adult care management team monitor that in year in terms of how all those factors are changing. And of course, that then feeds through into the finance monitor that we do every month. And of course, if those forecasts prove not to be what actually pans out, if demand is higher or some of those issues are higher, then we go through the whole process of how we manage, as indeed we manage any budget. Is there any way we can manage that? Are there any offsetting savings we could create in the department or across the council? It's just part of that ongoing active management of the budget, as it would be for any department.
Thank you. Calvin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree with, I think, most of the things that have been put forward. One thing that struck me when we were talking about sustainability was there seemed to be, we were talking about transport and working with providers, which might be something we add to the other points we've made about sustainability and working with providers on retrofitting, because there was I felt there was some vagueness about what was said on that. And I think that obviously, I think an important point would be around us monitoring the recruitment issue, both with regard to care staff, but also with regard to social workers and professional staff around, well, we've talked about all the various different types of assessment that there are around reviews and things like that as well, because I think there will be a lot of pressure on maintaining that in the future as well.
Thank you. So we are coming to the close and need to just go nap. Fiona, what have you got from this? Fiona Corcoran, that is.
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. Okay, so it seems to me like there are two clear recommendations that are, you know, the budget scrutiny recommendations. One is that, you know, requesting what's the contingency for the risk around the social care reform package, in terms of increased requests for assessments that would come due to those changes, and any additional staff and resource that might need to be recommended or might need to.
And in addition, I think changing sources of funding. You know, I think there's also this whole issue about fair funding, etc., etc. So there's an awful lot of contextual kind of financial tectonic plate shifting that, you know, clearly Stephen has flagged up as being, you know, a major risk. It's not one that we can actually plan for in definite numbers, but we clearly have to be aware of it. So it's something around that. Yeah. So that's one. Then the next major.
Work on the wording for that. So the second one was requesting assurance on what's being done to retrofit care home portfolio, and also around ensuring partners are working to meet sustainability targets and the funding required to achieve this. You know, whether, you know, assurance that is in the budget. I know that officers did talk about partners working towards those, but I know that in this summary now, I think it's come out that you feel that, you know, that hasn't fully answered. You need a bit more on that.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. Yes. No. Happy with that. There was something around waiting lists, I felt.
Yes.
And so. Yeah.
Yes. Shall I take? So what I've got some as conclusions, and so you might decide you want this as a recommendation, but I thought maybe because of the time frame for kind of reporting on it, it might be post IP scrutiny. But so I put it under a conclusion around waiting lists and the capacity to manage them, that a report continues to be given to the Cabinet panel monitoring this situation due to the high level of uncertainty around funding.
Does that capture it, do you think, people? You happy?
Yeah, I think we can work with that. Yeah, that's
okay.
right. As
Ron
long
is nodding.
as the report comes to Cabinet panel, that's the main issue. You know, the Cabinet panel is kept up to date with it.
So you're happy for that to stay as a report that to OSC, and it will go to Cabinet panel for that future ongoing work rather than a recommendation into the budget?
Yeah. Because it's how long the picture screen. There's no idea when this year this funding dilemma is going to be resolved. We got until the end of July, before the ICS board is appointed, etc. So the whole thing is up in the air.
And Sandy, do you want me to go on and just say the other conclusions I've got?
Listen,
okay, so one about working with service users and linking in with Healthwatch Hearts to work on the wording of comms.
Yes.
And that panel and Health Scrutiny Committee receive updates on the social care reform and changes within funding landscape and implications. So that's obviously, I know we've got it in the recommendations for budget, but I think it's probably worth having in as an ongoing oversight sort of.
Yes, can I just go back to healthcare comms? I think the point that we were teasing out, which fits with Richard's question, is it's both how the comms are written, which is the Health Watch thing, is it, you know, accessible language, but then it's also the content to make sure that we are confident that we are mapping out for people all the available sources of support. So it's both that they need to be comprehensive and they need to be comprehensible. Look at that. I really should be, you know, going into being a journalist or something, but that I think covers it. So if you can just put something, because I think that's the point that Richard was teasing out, is that there's this extraordinarily complex landscape that people face, which can be daunting, and how are we helping them to navigate it? They talked about the fact all the leaflets plus the telephone call centres, and then the issue raised by Health Watch was how accessible and comprehensible are the leaflets? I think that was the order. Richard, would you agree? Yeah, okay, fine. I've got the fake seal of approval. So if you can sort of slightly cut it that way, Fiona.
Yeah, I will. I know from your just discussion now, I think there's another conclusion, which was around transformation projects. And this, I don't know whether you maybe a report to panel or maybe it could be even a scrutiny bulletin around how much of this transformation, these projects, how much is new and innovative, and therefore has that element of risk attached to it, and how much has been tried and tested by other counties, to sort of give members an oversight of how much, you know, where the risks are and how great they might be.
Yes, I'm not sure that's a scrutiny report, so maybe it's something to panel, I guess. What do colleagues think? I'm not on this panel. I deliberately chose to chair something which I wasn't a member of.
It could be in addition to the risk register, I suppose, and it's an item that could come before the cabinet panel. But yeah, it's.
Does that make sense, Nigel? Like you're nodding. Does that make sense? Nigel, you're muted.
Yes, certainly we should note that for a future panel that could come to us. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll put that in for future panel. And the other thing, I don't know whether you want this on the conclusions, but this is another thing that you just discussed in this summary, was about audit committee considering and monitoring the risk around the number of people requiring assessments, care packages and additional staff and resource. So obviously we've covered that in the recommendations in terms of going into budget, but whether you want to have it noted as a conclusion to kind of you know, another route to make sure it's then ongoing, picked up by audit committee, is another option.
That's one for John, I think, to answer.
Yeah, can we note it on the note it rather than make the request of audit? Because I'd need to find a way of getting audit involved. We got involved through the risk register on the care providers. So if we note it and I've got it documented, I'll take it up with the risk group and see how we take it forward. But I need a way from audit to come into ACS.
John, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. So yeah, that's fine. I'll just word that a bit differently so it's all captured there, and then we can work out the practical way afterwards.
Yeah. Well, you could talk in terms of the panel considered whether audit had a role in this. Give me the opening to go and do something, but don't tie my hands.
Okay, done. Yes, that's good. Are we all content, people? I think there's some good meat there, actually. I think this has been an excellent morning's work.
Yeah.
And actually, I thought the officers were very, very good. I mean, you know, given that Chris Badger managed to skive off, I thought he was well represented by his team. And Stella was admirably short at the start. I mean, just
Sandy, are you trying to imply that his efforts were unnecessary?
No, I must confess it was a fairly drastic thing to do, isn't it? To start a family just to dodge IP scrutiny.
Can I mention that, you know, obviously not for reporting, but another risk that ACS faces, you probably were served by 2 or 3 potential directors of adult care elsewhere, and so. As you know, we always have to keep an eye on the fact that we have some brilliant people, but they are career professionals, and they may want to go off, particularly Chris's young age. They may want to go off and find their own patch to manage. So, you know, we have to keep them happy.
Yeah, we need them here. We've got good officers at the top.
It's a very strong team, actually. I've always thought it's a strong team.
It is certainly in adult care.
Yeah. So, well, look, I'm going to say thank you all. Fiona Corcoran, you're going to send me for the final draft, are you, before it goes off to?
Yes, I will. I'll draft it and send it to you before, you know, at some point this afternoon, and then you can, as the chair, you get the final check or any amendments, and then we'll go on from there. What we have done, I'm not sure if David Andrews is on the call at the moment, but what we've done on some of the previous ones was just at this point, when the recommendations are all agreed, to ask whether the exec member just wants to make a comment very briefly. Did you want to do that, Sandy?
I'm not going to. Yes, I mean, basically, is Stella on the call? Is she there? If she's not, then
I mean, the full formal response will be at cabinet, so it's not necessary. It's just a, you know.
Stella perfectly sensibly has left us to draw up our own. Stella, are you there? Oh, you are there. Do you want to say anything, Stella?
Just reappeared. Just reappeared.
There's no requirement for you to say anything, but if you fancy it.
No. But I want to say to you all, thank you so much for your time again today, and recommendations going forward be received and looked into, taking it very seriously. Thank you for this morning.
Thank you. And I do suggest, Stella, that you get someone to look at your technology, because you went back to being soft then again.
Oh,
so, yes.
Well,
yes.
I'm going to IT next, because it let me down at the beginning as well.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, but
see you soon. Thank you.
It's been, and you were absolutely delightfully short at the start in your own presentation, which was fantastic.
It was intentional. There was a lot to be said. More
there
than
was.
I can say. Thank you.
It was excellent. It was much appreciated.
David, before you wind up, can I beg your indulgence? This is Fiona Corcoran. I have in my diary clearly the 1st, which I will be attending anyway as a sub for Michael Muir because he's unwell. I take it, is that the meeting at which we present these outcomes?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay, and good. That so I'll be sitting in judgment of my own outcomes, which is
they're really just going to be ratified at that meeting because they've been agreed by you in this group today. It's not reopening the discussion. This group owns those recommendations. They'll be formally ratified by Overview and Scrutiny Committee just because on a technicality these webcast evidence gathering meetings can't be part of the formal meeting.
I hear what you say. Thank you for that. And can I just clarify? I had a hold in my diary for the Wednesday. I assume that is not now necessary. It will all be done on the Tuesday.
Yeah, just on the Tuesday afternoon.
Thank you, Sandy, for that.
You could go shooting, Richard.
No, don't be silly. The season finishes on the Monday.
I feed you the lines and you give the answers, you see. Now, Natalie, briefly.
I'm actually attending a scrutiny meeting instead of going shooting, dear boy. So there you are. Greater love hath no man for his county.
Natalie, you stuck your hand up briefly, but has Fiona answered the question?
She has.
Okay, good. David Andrews, before we finish, anything you want to add?
Thank you, thank you, Chairman. No, I think it's been an excellent session. The questions have been probing, the answers have been revealing. I just thank you all for turning in today, and particularly, recognising the members of OSC amongst us who have sat through all of them thus far and have one yet to go. So we're not quite there. We're approaching a full summit. But thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate it.
And to explain to people watching, members of the public, David is the chairman of Overview and Scrutiny, so he's in charge of this whole process. And I am vice chair, and Richard Butler from Labour is the other vice chair. And just also to say, actually, the panel you saw today, the group, is balanced politically. It's not bad. It's not desperately so well balanced in gender terms, but it also does reflect the whole geography of the county. And thank you for listening, and thank you all for taking part, and over and out at this stage.
Thank you, Sandy, for your chairing as well.
Here.